During the age of the progressive movement, America was also engaging in what we call imperialism. Our foreign policy goals were changing. As we watch this presentation, keep these questions in mind. Why did the United States abandon its traditional isolationist policies, that is, and take on the engagement of imperialism? And how did the United States expand its influence in the world? Some of the key ideas are that many 20th century American foreign policy issues have their origins in America's emergence as a world power at the end of the 19th century. American intervention into World War I ensured its role as a world power, and the growth of international trade displayed the American urge to build, to innovate, and explore new markets. We have three imperialist presidents that we must focus on. There is William McKinley, who was president from 1897 until 1901. He was regrettably assassinated, but replaced by Theodore Roosevelt, who served as president from 1901 until 1909, and he was followed by William Howard Taft, who served as president from 1909 until 1913. As we take a look at these two different ways of dealing with the world, I mentioned that America went from isolationism to imperialism. Isolationism is that idea that the United States should not be involved in the affairs of other nations. The Monroe Doctrine stated it very well, that the New World, that is, the Americas, was to be left alone by Europe. And that was that significant statement of Monroe Doctrine. You stay out of our business, we will stay out of your business. However, imperialism began to change some of these ideas. America wanted to expand. We needed to acquire new lands, new materials, and new markets. This age of imperialism generally refers to the idea of colonization, where America really comes full circle. We went from being a colony to getting colonies of our own. Imperialism was a powerful statement of what came to be known as the Roosevelt corollary. A corollary is something that goes along with another thing. Roosevelt stated that the United States is going to be the interventionist. We would intervene anywhere in the Americas, not Europe. So if there's a problem in our neighborhood, we will be the ones who step in and do something about it. Roosevelt's tendencies are often referred to as big stick diplomacy. His idea of this big stick diplomacy comes from one of his very favorite sayings, that is, speak softly and carry a big stick. By using this old idea, Roosevelt proclaims that the United States is going to be the police of the Western Hemisphere, that it's going to be up to us to protect what happens not just in our house, but in our entire neighborhood. There are several key reasons for American expansion as Uncle Sam grows larger and larger and larger. And of course, President William McKinley, as pictured above, is happy to fit a new suit. America felt the need to compete economically with Europe. Europe was still engaged in colonization. They were rapidly growing and increasing their influence in Africa and in Asia. And America realized if we don't do something to keep up, we will be left behind. Many Americans also saw expansion as a natural right. That is, it is a natural growth in science and reason. There's also a belief of cultural superiority. After all, shouldn't we spread American ideas and virtues to the other backwards people of the world? And America also needed new markets, new raw materials. We were continuing to grow and produce more. But the more we produce, the more we need to sell. But the more we sell, the more we need to produce, which means we need more materials coming in. So this is very economically driven. Let's take a look at imperialism as America related to this area here Latin America. We'll start in 1898, when William McKinley was president, with the Spanish-American War. It was caused primarily by economic interests in Cuba. Americans had invested in sugar plantations in Cuba, and Cuba was owned by Spain. Spain was getting a little bit harsh on these American plantation owners. In fact, even took their land away from them and grabbed the people who were working on them and the pro-American agitators and put them into internment camps. Yellow journalism is also going to play a key role here. Yellow journalism and these journalists would exaggerate or hype up the news in order to raise awareness, sometimes completely making stories up. They were encouraging Americans to want to act. Unlike the muckrakers that we talked about before, the yellow journalists are going to exaggerate the truth, while the muckrakers simply told the truth. Well, all we needed was a spark. Americans were agitated. We had an economic interest. We were ready to go, but we needed a spark. We needed them to hit us first. And that spark happened aboard the USS Maine. That's an American ship that was parked in Havana Harbor. It exploded, kaboom, and sunk to the bottom. And naturally, we knew that it must have been Spain's fault. Quickly, America declared war in 1898. One of our heroes that we get out of this great war, this great Spanish-American War, was Theodore Roosevelt. He became very popular. A lot of stories were written about him. He led a group of volunteers called the Rough Riders in the charge up, what was it, San Juan Hill. And of course, when Theodore Roosevelt told us the great war stories after, naturally, he was the big hero. America won this war. It lasted roughly 4 months. And in the end, Cuba became a protectorate. While we interceded, saying, hey, we need to look out for the interests of the Cubans, we felt that it would be unwise to claim it for ourselves. So we made them a protectorate. That is, they were technically independent, but we would be responsible for protecting them and their rights and being sure that their government worked the way we wanted it to. We did claim new lands, though. The United States annexed Puerto Rico, as well as the Philippine Islands by the end of the Spanish-American War. This was later dubbed a splendid little war. It lasted 4 months. Relatively few American casualties, and the United States made incredible gains and completely and totally destroyed Spain as a military power. In 1903, America is going to open up its interests in the Panama region, right there. It was Theodore Roosevelt who wanted his shot at building a canal that would connect the Atlantic Ocean with the Pacific Ocean. This would help the United States with trade so that we wouldn't have to ship our goods all the way around South America, as well as the American Navy. Again, Theodore Roosevelt believed, speak softly and carry a big stick. His big stick was going to be the American Navy. But in order to patrol both the Pacific and the Atlantic, we would need 2 fleets, unless there were a quick route between those 2 oceans. And so the Panama Canal was essential for trade. It was even more essential for the American Navy. But there was a problem. It was not owned by Panama. Panama was part of another country called Colombia. Well, Theodore Roosevelt got on the phone and called up Colombia and said, hey guys, we would like to buy land on which to build a canal. And Colombia said, no. Hung it up. Well, Roosevelt calls back. Maybe they didn't. Okay, how about this, says Theodore Roosevelt. We will borrow it. We will pay significant rent on this land. All we want to do is build this canal. And again, Colombia said, no, you're not going to come down here and force your way around. We saw what you guys did during the Mexican War. We saw what you've done with Spain. You're not going to come down here and force us to do something we don't want to do. Not for sale. Theodore Roosevelt was not impressed. So he came up with his own way around this. The United States, Theodore Roosevelt, is going to back an independence movement of Panama, where Panama would secede from Colombia and declare its independence. Immediately, Theodore Roosevelt recognized Panama as a legitimate government, a sovereign nation, and one that deserved our protection. When Colombia realized everything that was going on and realized that Panama had the backing and support of Theodore Roosevelt, they knew that if they went into Panama, the United States would intervene on behalf of Panama. Thus, Theodore Roosevelt used big stick diplomacy to get the Panama Canal built. William Howard Taft came to office after Theodore Roosevelt and realized that maybe force wasn't the best way, the nicest way to go about getting things done. And he initiated what came to be known as dollar diplomacy. William Howard Taft is going to encourage American businesses and banks to invest in Latin America, to go down and build factories, to create farms, to put those people to work in order to provide the raw materials that we need. This way here, Americans are going to make money, and these people in Latin America are going to have jobs. But things are so unstable down there. Why would a bank leave the safety of America to invest and open up in Central America? What if something bad happens? Well, that's where William Howard Taft says, I've got your back. If things go bad down there, the United States would step in. If any civil unrest threatened American interests, then we would intervene using the military if necessary. So this is a more passive imperialism where America is using its dollar power rather than its military power. Moving across the world, we find Asia and the Pacific, also areas of interest for the United States. After all, we have two oceans along our shores. The first area of interest we want to focus on is Hawaii. American interests in Hawaii dealt with things like Chinese trade. This would be an excellent island halfway across the Pacific Ocean to stop en route to China. Also, Americans had sugar plantations and also the desire for a U.S. naval base to center our naval actions in the Pacific area. The United States was opposed by the Hawaiians, especially their monarch, Queen Liliuokalani. Try to say that 3 times fast. And as she inspired her people to press back against these American investors, the United States, these investors, these businessmen in Hawaii, were left to their own devices. When they called the United States and said, will you take them over? Congress said, no, not so much. Why don't you seize the government and then we will come in and help. So these Americans put forth efforts. They deposed Hawaii's monarch and created a government for themselves. And then the United States quickly annexed Hawaii, realizing its incredible strategic value. That all happened in 1898. The Philippines, I had already mentioned we annexed after the Spanish-American War, and we were thrilled to have this. The Philippines are located just southeast of China. This would be a wonderful base for our military operations, if necessary, in the region, but also a good base for trade with China and India. To our shock, when we liberated the Philippines from the evil Spanish rule, for some reason, they didn't want to be Americans. And then the United States needed to continue to fight the Filipinos, the people from the Philippines who wanted freedom from America. Go figure. Well, the United States finally granted Philippine independence after many years of this civil war and guerrilla-type fighting in 1916. Somebody once said that America won the Philippines at the cost of one man. That is, only one American lost their lives in the Battle of Manila Bay to win the Philippines and defeat the Spanish Navy. However, that person went on to say, and it cost us all of our principles as we forced them to be a territory of the United States. When it came to China, we were having a problem. There were many spheres of influence that were going on. European nations, as well as Japan, had carved China into what we call spheres of influence. That is, places of economic domination. And what they did in each of these areas that you see here on the map, any other country was not allowed to trade in those regions. So it was blocked off. While technically China was its own country, these spheres of influence dictated not just the economy and who was allowed to trade, but also what laws were going to be obeyed. If you were in the British area, which is orange on the map, you obeyed British law, not Chinese law. If you were in the yellow area, which was dominated by France, you obeyed French law. And that goes the same for Germany, Japan, as well as Russia. Notice that America did not have a sphere of influence, and the United States wanted some action. We wanted access to trade. We knew there was a vast market. And so, in 1899, Secretary of State John Hay demanded an open-door policy. That is to say, a policy that would give equal trading rights to all nations in China. Again, we wanted full access. Also, John Hay indicated that any foreigners should obey Chinese law as opposed to the laws of whatever country was dominating that sphere in the sphere of influence. And this is going to make many of the Chinese people pretty satisfied with Secretary of State John Hay, where we say we want a leg in, we want equal trading rights. Ultimately, the United States is going to make a move to enhance fair competition. Well, the growth of international trade that occurred from the late 1800s to World War I is going to be the beginning of a global economy. America is growing within, and we are also extending our influence out. And as an active participant in the global economy, America needs to be more active in its global attention, as other incidents are going to arise around the world that will have an impact on what happens here at home.